Hello, I'm Kathy Sutherland, CEO and partner at GoldenTree. March 8th marks International Women's Day, a day in which we come together to celebrate achievements of women across the globe. This year, we're excited to be speaking with a special guest, Gabby Reece. Gabby is an exceptional leader, spokeswoman, and advocate. Gabby is known for her remarkable volleyball career, is a best-selling author, an entrepreneur, an important voice for leading healthy lives through her podcast, The Gabby Reece Show. In 1994, Gabby became Nike's first female athlete to design a shoe, which became the first women's shoe to outsell the iconic Air Jordan. Above all of her accomplishments, Gabby is both humble and authentic. Gabby does not pretend. She is refreshingly open and provides perspectives as she sees them. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is Embrace Equity. Gabby has certainly proven through her life to embrace equality and advance opportunities for women. Thank you, Gabby, for joining us. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Abigail Glerum, a managing director in business development at GoldenTree, to talk with Gabby about her remarkable career and unique perspective.
Thank you, Kathy. Happy International Women's Day and welcome, Gabby Reece. We are so pleased to have you today. Your successful volleyball career and many successful careers have been defined by success, but also breaking boundaries and overcoming challenges. We really appreciate you taking the time to share with us your insights and your perspective. So let's dive right into questions. Before we start with your professional life and who you are today, I want to spend a little bit of time on your childhood. Are there any experiences that are particularly or were particularly defining for you and made you who you are today?
You know, it's interesting. I think as you get older, you do your best to try to almost let go of a narrative from your childhood. But if you said, hey, looking back in just a kind of contextual way, when I was very young, probably about 2 years old, I ended up living with friends of the family. And not my parents. My parents actually were not together at that time. I lived with them for about 5 years. So from 2 to 7, I didn't live with my parents. And during that time, actually, my father passed away in a plane crash. So, you know, why this feels important is, yeah, there were some challenges, obviously, with that, but I think it sort of geared me up to be not only solving problems and looking ahead, because really it comes from probably a fear-based initially. You know, it's not that you can't rely on anyone, but like if things are coming up, what are the ways that you can navigate it? And not the luxury of kind of sitting in, this isn't the way I want it. I grew up in the Caribbean, so that also gave me a different point of view, living on an island and just not in the mainland United States. Because also there was never the idea of, oh, you have to be someone, you have to do something. Even going to college was sort of an anomaly. So I think a lot of these different elements definitely formed not only who I am as a person, but also how I navigated things.
Thanks. That's helpful. And I think you started playing volleyball and basketball sort of later in high school. You know, for a professional athlete, you know, now we hear about kids starting and sort of being groomed in that way. You know, how was your entrance into those sports? Do you think, you know, coming in at what we would now probably consider a later age, how did that sort of influence your perspective differently than maybe some of the people that you played with, either when you were younger or as a professional?
Maybe not good or bad in the way that I wasn't, like you said, put on this track really early. I came to the games very late. I dabbled sort of in 10th grade. I was very tall. I was 6 feet at 12. I was finished growing at 15 at 6'3". So there were some obvious things with that. But I think what was good about coming to it late was knowing myself differently as a person without sport and structure, which also helped me really covet and cherish the wonderful things about sport, about being part of a team or, you know, sort of an athletic family, if you will, about having discipline, about what it feels, how you make yourself feel when you work really hard, because it just wasn't always a part of my life. So I moved from the Caribbean after 10th grade to 11th grade in Florida. where sort of this organized sport was more established. And so when I showed up at this little tiny school called Keswick, they were like, oh, you're playing sports, because I was 6'3". And if you were that size, you went to a different school to get attention and do all this. So I fell into it, then got an athletic scholarship. I chose Florida State. And again, my experience wasn't, oh, this is what I do. This is like, wow, this is new and what an opportunity. And I feel really good about who I am when I'm doing this. And I think that that's how I got my teeth into athletics. But yes, I was definitely a late bloomer. And listen, it was timing. I think now I understand it's much more competitive in a different way, but also it creates a limitation, right? Like less kind of wide view and experience about life. And also when all you do is sport and you know that, you don't realize also kind of what a gem it is.
Sure. No, that's helpful. And, I think in going into sports that way probably is what's helped you translate to a lot of success in other parts of your career. So, maybe focusing a little bit on your athletic career from Florida State to the Olympics, and then ultimately as a professional, what are some of the important lessons as an athlete that you have found are sort of the most applicable and still important to you today?
I say this also, I'm a parent of 3 daughters. They're all, quite a bit older, but I want to say this. If athletics is about, I think, some really important things, learning to work for a common goal, like in a company, let's say, working with people that maybe you don't agree with 100% about everything, but you do have this common goal that binds you. The idea of success. Maybe I would have a game I wasn't the best player, but we still won. So isn't that the point? So it was sort of learning all these things: discipline, failure, getting up after you get your butt kicked, after you're embarrassed. All of these things, I think, really helped me not only navigate my business life, my personal life, but also problem solving. Hey, this isn't working. Let's adapt. Not, well, this was the game plan. Yes, it was, but it's not working. So what do we need to do now? And also learning things that make you uncomfortable. So for example, if you like to do something a certain way, and physical is easier to talk about than maybe strategical kind of emotionality, where if you go, hey, I like to hit the ball cross body. And your coach is like, you do that well, but you have to do the other stuff. So actually learning how to deconstruct yourself from a physical place, which is more objective, which then helps you kind of tackle some of the emotional things. Well, this is how I do it. Yes. And that doesn't work anymore. So how do you want to solve the problem? So I think athletics really teaches you to be more comfortable with being criticized, with making uncomfortable changes, and sort of really committing to what is it going to take to achieve the end goal. And it's very helpful.
I think I love that perspective of you can win, but maybe not have your best game. And you can also have your best game and maybe not win. And how does that dynamic, that's certainly dynamic, I think, in most careers that people face as being part of a team or part of an organization. You mentioned your 3 daughters. I'm one of 3 girls. So I sync with your middle daughter specifically, but I would say, what are some of the ways? Obviously, athletics have been an important part of you and your husband's life. How do you see athletics being a part, or how do you hope or want athletics to be a part of your daughters' lives?
Well, here within lies the irony of life, right? You're a parent, and I've dedicated my life to trying to be, and I put it in quotes, healthy, because that means different things to different people. My husband is still actively a professional athlete. His name is Laird Hamilton. He's a big wave surfer. So we've dedicated our lives to this space. But what you'll find is your children oftentimes will depart from everything that you are because they're trying to find their own identity. And I think because I wasn't forced into athletics, and it was really my own quest, and I truly am in touch with how difficult it is, I never forced my kids. The idea was, hey, you got to move your body so you can, feel good and be healthy and show up your best in the world. But if you're not a professional athlete or a collegiate athlete, that's okay. So it is my pill to swallow, like so many parents, where you realize too, your children have their own journey, but it's just those fundamentals you want in place, which is, do you know how to work hard? Do you know how to be uncomfortable? Do you know how to take constructive criticism? Do you know how to take care of yourself? And also using your physical wellness to kind of help your emotional wellness. I think for me, if I overcame a lot of obstacles, I used, reverse engineer it from kind of physically feeling pretty good to emotionally trying to let things go. So it's been a hard thing for me, I have to admit, where success for me was through physical action and sport. And my kids are doing different things. Actually, one of them is, kind of more athletic. And the youngest one is, there's a lot of negotiating around being in sports. But it's that reminder of, if they get the real lessons, the best you can do is actually be a serious example.
Yeah, no, and I like that you talk about that a lot in your book and outside of sports too. Just, that your children listen or watch more what you do than listen to what you say. And, I think that probably applies to your broader life beyond just the athletics component. One of the other things you talk a little bit about is I believe at one point you were looking or exploring the idea of being, on sports news and evaluating games, but you like you're so strong, such a strong believer in showing up for the game. And so how do you sort of pair that perspective with also being very competitive? Are those sort of at odds? How do you, how's that maybe evolved over your life?
Well, it's a time and a place, right? Like, that's everything in life, is what is the right place for certain, actions and attitudes, and when does it become inappropriate or detrimental? And when people go, I'm just competitive, it's like, yes, and that might work in like 30% of your life or 20%, but it's not going to work in these other places. So I think it's just a level of maturity and being objective, and kind of self-control, or going, listen, I know myself, and my personality isn't going to work well in that environment. So I think that it's also knowing when to go, I may not need to go over there, and or exploring all the sides, right? Being competitive in certain ways and not being competitive at all in another way. But keeping that self-awareness. I think people have a tendency to say, well, this is how I do it. It's like, yes, I understand that. And that's great, right in that very specific lane. But if what we're trying to do is be as successful, whatever that means to you, and that's so important too, is to really understand what are your definitions of success. Because for some people, it gets beat into us. Success is like when you make a certain amount of money, or you get a certain amount of attention, or you have a title. But if you're not feeling good or accomplished, then maybe that's not your definition of success. And that means also different definitions in different areas. So you can maybe be kicking butt in work, but you're softer in your personal life or your friendships. And I think that that's the other thing is not only allowing those definitions to change as your life changes, but also being really clear when you're doing something. Well, what would success look like for you?
So let's expand on that a little bit, because you've had success as an Olympic athlete, a New York Times bestselling author, an entrepreneur. To what do you attribute that range? How do you achieve success sort of differently and leverage different characteristics or strengths of yours to achieve in various careers that in many ways from the outside look like very different careers, and you've been able to achieve success in so many of them?
The reason I think I pursued being a professional athlete and doing all these other things was, first of all, recognizing that I was fortunate to be put in the position to pursue them. And I think starting from a place of, I don't mean this in the corny way of gratitude, really reframes things, because there's going to be pressure in everything. But if you can look at it always still as a very fortunate opportunity for you to pursue in the first place, then I think you kind of armor up a little differently versus, well, I'm going to do this because this is what I do, and now I just feel stressed out. But going like, wow, this is a huge opportunity to be a professional athlete, or to own a business, or to be a parent, or whatever thing you're pursuing. Then you shift your thinking, and also it really is, I'm me, the person that I am. So let's say I'm Gabby, and one of the things I do is X. Not my identity is I'm a CEO or a professional athlete or someone's mom. Those are things that I do, but I'm me. And so the more that we can go with who we are into each of and any of these roles, be it different, the constant will be that you're coming with yourself, your perspectives, hopefully that are growing and changing, your value system, your level of discipline, tenacity, whatever it is. And so I think it's really important that people realize that they can take themselves and direct it anywhere. I work with a lot of professional athletes or, even people who, let's say, played college and then they couldn't play in the pros. And I always say to them, it's like you're a loaded gun. What's your next target? And people not being so defined by something they've already done or are doing. And that has been very, very helpful. And the other part of that is pursuing things that you're genuinely interested in, not, well, this seems like the next most natural step, or everyone's doing that and they're, getting a lot of attention, or that's a great market to be in because there's a lot of opportunity. I don't know that works as well as who am I? And wow, that intrigues me. I don't know much about it, but I'm drawn to it. So it's also allowing yourself to really pursue your inner interests and passions.
That's helpful. I want to pivot a little bit to talk about your community. You talk about surrounding yourself with certain people and how important that is to you in your life. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What advice do you have for our audience about how to build their own communities? And this might be a second question, but how does social networks fit into that concept of community for you? So maybe two questions or maybe a loaded question, but, interested to hear a little bit more thoughts on that.
It's an interesting question because let's just start with personal. We'll start with that aspect of community. I think it's, I can even say, when I was younger, it was about people that were, working hard. They were excited for you if you were successful. They weren't. And if, let's say you're an entrepreneur or you're doing something new and you have something that you're undertaking, you want to make sure you're around people that tell you the truth and give you genuine reflection, but they don't say things like, oh, you're going to do that? That's really hard. It's like, they got to go, right? You want people who sort of realistically show you the pitfalls and say, did you think about this? Have you measured this, risk, things like that, but simultaneously are saying it's completely possible, because to do certain things, it is impossible. So you don't need a community around you that's not supporting you. But it is important to have those people that are like, hey, you're acting badly, or you haven't considered this, that are really willing to tell you the truth, and push you. I have a physical fitness community that will show up and push me so I can continue to grow and improve. I have friends that are loving and supportive, but again, will tell me things that are uncomfortable if it's necessary. And I think it's not having a community on the personal side that you feel obligated to. Sometimes you can have a friend for 20 years and you think, this is not working. And I know it isn't. Oh, but I've known them so long. That won't be loyal. Life is short. And sometimes there's elements of being loving that are ruthless. And that is a hard thing, especially for females, to be loving and ruthless simultaneously, but it's important. And then on the work side of community, let's say, because you do have to have that, especially if you're networking and things like that, I think it's essential not to confuse them. Be very straightforward. Like, I have people that I like, that I work with, but we're not friends. But the flip side of that is, whenever I have an idea or I want to talk to them or I want something, I'm very straightforward. So when I am being transactional, if you will, it still has honesty in it. So it's not like, oh, we're friends and let's get drinks and we're friends. And oh, by the way, it's like, hey, I have this idea and I want to talk to you. Can I make a meeting with you? And yes, we can be friendly and like each other. So, and maybe the parameters of what I want from my work community, they're very different than my personal, because again, there's some things, there's a something happening, give and take, going back and forth, but that still can be very, very positive. I just think it's important for it not to bleed all the way across into your life. That's something you have to be the gatekeeper of.
It sounds like honesty in both your personal and your professional career is an important tenet of really how you approach everything. As maybe the one area that is a foundation to your life is obviously being a parent. Tell me a little bit about how you and Laird approach parenting. What advice would you have for our audience, which there'll be many parents and many, working mothers, any advice you can share, perspective, I know would be appreciated.
Well, I want to start that by saying parenting is one of the most personal things in the world, right? So I believe that the number one thing people have to do is trust themselves. And if they're in a partnership, what is best for your specific family. I will share what has worked for me, because it is a moving target and something that you're always learning and really getting chopped down quite a bit. It's first honoring yourself and your own family code. I thought I could sort of be a good example, try to be in a healthy relationship, keep a safe and clean home, and that would take care of everything, because I didn't have that. So in my mind, in my deficit, I was like, oh, I'll just provide the things I wasn't provided and everything will be fine. And the reality is, it will be impossible to protect our children from everything. They will have experiences that you don't want them to have. And the tendency will be to beat ourselves up. So what I will say is you have to do the best that you can and understand that things are going to happen regardless, or kids are going to go through things. And can you, first of all, be kind to yourself, but these are the opportunities to really learn. They're very, very uncomfortable. I can give you a scenario. I have one daughter in particular who many years ago, 6 years ago, went through a very, very challenging time. Even was like, hey, I don't think I want to be here, right? And so for me as a parent, there is nothing more devastating than that. But that's the moment. That is the moment that all the expansion can happen, that you can either hide and go under, fall apart. You can do all this, or you can say, okay, what do we need to do? How do we solve the problem? What resources do we need? And how do we all collectively grow from this? And it's freaking hard. So it's not about not having control, because you're there to guide them and put these bumpers. But if you think you can navigate it perfectly, you can't. Right. So you just have to keep navigating it with an open mind and be willing to take a look at it. Which is sometimes harder. I think as a parent, you want to lock it down and go, well, in this family, this is how it is. You guys fit into this template, or that's your problem. And the other thing is, I will say, and my youngest daughter is, in 10th grade, you want them to do everything weird and uncomfortable when they're in your house, not when you send them out. So even though it's awful for you to go through as the parent, you actually want that. So
you
that when you
there for that,
send them into the world, you know that they're not spinning out because they've never had freedom or choices. Right. And like I said, there's things I joke with my girls, like, no, I wasn't supposed to know about that until we were at a Thanksgiving in 20 years. And you said as an adult, oh, you know what I was doing? But the reality is, you kind of want that. I will give two things of advice, and then I know we'll move on, is I had someone tell me the best things we could do for our children is, one, listen without fixing. Just listen. It's very hard to do because we have the answers. Wink, wink. Listen, genuinely listen. And two, make yourself happy. And I know happiness is in a fixed place, but overall, so they know what it looks like. And after that, yeah, it's all a dance.
So maybe on the flip side of that, though, you've been able to provide for your daughters in a way that you didn't have growing up. How do you ensure that your daughters, or do you want to ensure that your daughters have some, level of determination and grit growing up in, very different, very fortunate circumstances?
That's like the gazillion-dollar question. How do I get you to, be resilient and all these things? You don't, that expression, strong men make, soft times or easy times, and easy time make weak men, and weak men make hard times. Sometimes you're in this weird cycle and you're like, oh, I made it the way I thought I'd want it. And now I'm going to have to figure out how to put obstacles in my children's way so that they can be ready for the world. Again, this goes back to being an example. And how do you deal with adversity, and how do you show up, and how are your manners, and how's your work ethic? But after that, this is the hard question, which is, okay, so we created all this opportunity, and now our kids are what we perceive as soft. And so that is very tricky.
So maybe turning a little bit to your fitness and healthy living focus across a number of your careers. You're clearly an advocate. You're a co-founder of Layered Superfood, as well as Extreme Performance Training. Can you tell us a little bit about these businesses and, why are they important to you, where they're going? You mentioned areas that your, success is being about genuinely interested in some of the things that you're working on. What are you the most genuinely interested in, and where do you see, the next sort of step for these businesses?
And first, I want to say, so for example, Layered Superfood is a publicly traded company. It's about 7 years old, and XPT is privately owned. And I will tell you, there have been many failures before this. So now that we're going to talk about these two, I just want to say we've had other businesses that have failed. That too is part of the process, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Layered Superfood was created in my home by my husband, making coffees, and it's a plant-based coffee and creamer business. The product is actually quite excellent. And the idea was behind Layered has this philosophy like, hey, if you're doing something every single day, so what sheets you're in or what food you're eating, can you do this at the best level? Because that accumulation through time. And it's like not going to take you more time. You don't have to change your habits. You're just subbing in one better thing for another. So that was not only very easy to get behind, but the timing for this particular product, I think, was very good. And we're not that strategic. We just got fortunate. And then, so I like that, because the thing about this is maybe you weren't a professional athlete, but if somehow something that we're a part of is in supporting your day a little bit more, that feels really good. And if you understand that, like, hey, you can make it a successful business, then now you're in reality. Because that's the other thing, is how do you separate passion from, well, 4 people need this product, so what are you going to do as a business? So that's the other thing. And it's an everyday business. So you're doing something that people are using every day, which is very good. People only buy surfboards once every 5 years. So it's knowing also, like, hey, seems realistic. And XPT is great because it's about getting people to explore what physical training and what breathing practices and what things really work for them. Because I'm not asking you to do it the way I do it, but I am asking you and inviting you to put the energy and invest in yourself. Hey, when I eat like this, plant-based, or, I eat animal protein, whatever, how does it make me feel? How's my energy? How's my sleep? How's my elimination? Whatever that is. Hey, when I move like this, or when I go outside and I hike, or I go in the pool, or I do whatever, how do I feel? And so I want to be in things that people are ultimately being supported. But yes, it's also about being strategic. I'm not here just to be like, oh, isn't that great? Yes, I want to be successful. I want these businesses to have good margins and all these things that I'm well aware of. Yep. So it is about blending it.
And I like in both businesses, and, whether it's something as simple as just improving that coffee every morning, it feels like the focus is very much about what's realistic. What are small changes you can make that have a big impact on your life? Another area that you've been involved in is your podcast, the Gabby Reece Show. You've interviewed a lot of really interesting people on that show. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your favorite interviews and some of the favorite, people you've spoken with, or concepts that at the end of the interview have really stuck with you?
Yeah, I love the show because, again, this goes back to forced learning. We get so busy that who reads a book anymore? So this is like forces me. I have to read every book of all the guests, whether it's like Dr. David Sinclair or Andrew Huberman, or I interviewed Christian McCaffrey yesterday, who's an NFL player. So there's a diverse group. I think what I first hope to do is have real conversations that people listening get takeaways where they go, oh, maybe I could try that. But keep it simple. The problem is a lot of these concepts, they are very heady and scientific. So how do we keep breaking it down for that person most in need? Too busy to figure it out, overwhelmed, no time, no money, no extra resources. So that's the hope. I think a couple things that really jumped out at me is, for example, a lot of studies done in science are done on men. By the way, I love men. However, if we're talking about, let's say, something like fasting, a lot of women are like, oh, I'm fasting. And the first 6 weeks were awesome. And now it isn't. It's because women aren't really supposed to fast the way men are, for example, because the science shows that we usually perform better, especially when you're active, when we're fed. Okay. So there's a woman, Dr. Stacy Sims, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and they're a little more, they're very scientific, but they've had time to focus on women. So things like that have supported me, because when I fast with my husband and I want to kill everybody, and he's like, I'm just getting more energy. I'm like, what is wrong with me? Nothing. So things like that, or people who have it so, and I put in quotes, figured out, and they tell you each day that they've got to put their shoes on and, take a deep breath and lean into it, just like everybody else. I think revealing that to people, that even those people who know better, have the answers, whatever that means, are still really doing their best as a human being to try to navigate, whether it's their relationships, finding time to exercise, or not grab, the big ice cream sundae when they want it.
Right. One of the topics that you talk a lot about, and have interviewed, a number of different experts, is sort of aging. And you talk a lot about sort of redefining aging as a baby boomer. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how you think about aging?
Yeah, so I can use a perfect example. Stephen Kotler, who's a well-known author who writes a lot about flow state. And he has something called the Flow Collective. And he just has a book out called Gnar Country, GNAR, like gnarly. And what he did is he pursued learning new skiing tricks, very challenging, at 53 years old. And he's like, hey, can we learn more when we're older, all things like that. So for example, in our 50s, the right and left hemisphere of our brain actually really start to communicate. There's a book called From Strength to Strength by Albert C. Brooks, where he talks about that's when we can synthesize information very well. That's why we're great mentors, things like that. So the point is that if you need science to back up that there's still positive growth as you get older, it's there. However, mindset is everything. And it's not like, hey, I'm 53 right now. It's not like I'm like, well, I'm going to walk around in hot shorts. I barely did that in my 20s. I'm not talking about that. So I'm not talking about fighting where we are in life, because it's a great thing. It's about saying, oh, I'm not going to limit myself because, oh, now I'm 35, now I'm 45. You want to be realistic, but you don't want to limit yourself. And this goes back to that community, right? You don't want to have people be like, oh, well, talking about their aches and pains all of the time. So there is even real data showing, hey, frame of mind really has a lot to do with aging. And I just want to encourage people that you not only can participate and grow, but also you can contribute. And I think that is so important. If you have a little bit more wisdom or a little bit more experience, and you can contribute to the world that you're in, and you feel good and you're shiny and you're happy and you have some vitality, embrace that and have this idea of like, how can I be my best? And what does that look like? And also creating a real strategy for that. That means laying out the times that you're going to exercise and work out, and you don't compromise that for anyone unless, of course, something serious happens. That means being ultra strategic about my food and where I want to have fun, because a lot of things we eat are not food, they're fun. And really knowing that. And for parents, really teaching your children what is food and what is fun. And it's okay to have fun, but it's not every day, 3 times a day. And kind of realizing that this is my adventure, my life, and what do I want that to look like? And sort of moving through my experience, my life, and saying, okay, I have today. How do I maximize today? Because after that, I don't really know what else we can do. And people sometimes make it like, oh, anti-aging, or I'm going to live to 150. I don't know about that. But if we have these best practices in place, my relationships, number one, connection is more important than I eat kale. It just is. What we're eating is number two. Managing stress, getting to bed is super important. And then move your body like the kind of animal that you are, because it's meant to move. And get outside, watch a sunset, look at the mountain, appreciate a tree. These things are known to really support us. But I'm going to age, I think, just the best way that I can, but not making that the goal, if that makes sense.
No, that's great. So Gabby, I loved reading about the community center and workouts that you do locally in Hawaii. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with that community center and, why you gravitated towards that type of, training environment?
Well, I was living in Kauai, and I was allowed to use the St. Regis at the time. It's a one hotel right now, their gym. And I what I did is I rented out this little community center room for an hour. I'd book it, and it was like $30 or something to have the room. And I invited like 6 to 8 of my friends, because none of the gyms there were no gyms open. And then I would be at the grocery store and someone would be like, "Oh, I heard, so-and-so's there. Can I come?" And it ended up being about anywhere from 60 to 80 people. And I would charge everybody $1 because they could be covered by my insurance. And what it was is, okay, so number one, I had to show up because I trained with them. I wrote the workouts and did everything, but I was training with them. So that kept me accountable, created a window for me to get it done. Simultaneously, this was the real way I could contribute to my community. This is what I do. Yeah. Right? Like, that's who I am. It's like I tell my friends, I may not go out to girls' night with you, but if something's really happening, I'm going to be there, if that makes sense. And that's the other thing, is like, hey, this is who I am. And what happened is that it was a way for me to learn, because I learned so much. I had to be creative and learn. It pushed me, but it was in the environment that I felt like you still have your finger in reality. Success puts us in a bubble and elevates us in a way and separates us. And it gets us away from the real practices that got us to success in the first place. So I think, and it wasn't like I was so deliberate about it, but I figured I learned this going through this process, was being back into something that is, quote, real, will not only make me feel good, but it will make me better in all the pursuits that I'm in, because it will keep me in touch. One thing you don't want to do in business is get out of touch. Then you're behind. Right. So that means sometimes rolling up your sleeves and getting down and dirty in there so you understand. Or how about this? You have people that are younger than you reverse looping and teaching you. And sometimes that's hard. I heard a great story, a great quote Mark Cuban said. His dad said, "You do not live in the world that you are born to." And so if you want to talk about business and progress and aging, then you have to actually, in certain ways, stay deeply in touch.
Yeah. Keep learning. Yeah. And I think it sounds like that community is, people from 20 years younger than you to 20 years older than you. So it's really sort of a broad participation across your community. And, I think there's probably things that you're learning from people that are 20 years older than you in that class, as well as those that are 20 years younger.
Well, yeah. And like 30% were males too. And I think that's important too, is to have those sensibilities living and working together, because we get the strengths from all sides. And the other side was so fascinating is I'd have 18-year-old girls looking at 70-year-old women, and the 70-year-old women might be lifting a little bit more weight than the 18-year-old girl. So two things happen. The 18-year-old girl goes, "Oh, that's what 70 looks like. Cool."
Right. Such good motivation. Yeah.
Great. And then the 70-year-old is getting, "Hey, you know what? I'm still doing it." So I feel that taking away lifting barriers and just putting us all together, we also realize we have so much to give each other, and we're also a lot more similar than we are different.
You mentioned that you've have both females and males in that class, and it made me think about how you and Laird partner together in a number of your different business ventures. How do your different strengths and skill sets, as people, as, more stereotypical female versus male, how does that work? What are the challenges to that relationship?
Well, working with your partner is always a dance. Like yesterday, I needed Laird to record some stuff for Laird Superfood, and he didn't want to, but somehow I'm the messenger, and I'm like, okay, well, they need it. Like this isn't personal. Like you just got to read these lines. But I think what we've learned is using our differences to support the greater situation and not let them be in conflict personally. And I have learned, this is really where I've learned as a female, to just give information. So if you're in business, it's like a really great coach. This isn't personal. I'm giving you feedback. I'm giving you information. If this makes you mad or uncomfortable, that's actually something you're going to have to deal with.
Navigate. Yeah.
Yes. And so that was a very valuable lesson for me as a woman. It probably took to my mid 30s where it's like, oh, this is just information. And like, I'm not going to get wrapped up in your deal. And so it's the same thing in my partnership, and it's trust. It's like if Laird says, hey, I need to do this, or you need to do that, there's so much trust there that we've learned to make it, work in our strengths. He's very creative. How do I protect those ideas and also execute them over the long run? Things like that, dealing with details. The other thing is, and I want to say this for people who work, with all types of people, sometimes what I'm required to do, for example, in my scenario, is it like an everyday thing? And sometimes what Laird is required to do is like once every 10 days. I can't be mad about that.
Yeah.
We've taken our roles. I'm better at this than he is. He's certainly better at that. And I just understand. So right. For example, let's say you're the kicker on the football team. Maybe you only come on the field one time. That's your job. Yeah. And so I think it's understanding you've chosen whatever your job, your lane is, and they're doing something else. And that's how the whole thing works. And when people say it's not fair and it's not even, I don't think it's realistic. I think life is unfair and sometimes really in our favor. And nature is savage and brutal. And that is the world that we live in. And no matter how much everybody's trying to make everything even, it just isn't.
Yeah. Maybe as it relates to, some of the key healthy living concepts that you've really embraced. I know breathing is a really important one. What are the ones, if you were to say 2 or 3 of really on a day-to-day basis that you incorporate that you think are critical to your happiness, critical to you, approaching your careers with the right mindset? What are some of those, I guess, mantras, or, whether it's a perspective or whether it's a physical exercise, what are the 3 things that you feel like you really can't kind of live without on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, I'm going to give you something a little deeper first, so you have an understanding. So whether I talk to a Harvard psychologist or a GI specialist from, Washington, D.C., or a performance coach, something that shows up over and over about health and homeostasis, well-being, whatever that is, sleep and stress, metabolic function, cellular function, chronic inflammation, and, metabolic dysfunction is a root cause for a lot of things, whether it's deeper anxiety, overweight, diabetes, cancer. So the good news is a lot of the same thing, root cause, is showing up for different people in different ways. Okay, what does that look like? That means go to bed at the same time every night. If you have a small and new child and baby, it's going to be a couple years. It just is that way. Fine. Go to bed, get up at the same time. These things have been known to sort of improve your sleep. Don't be on your screen. We all know that. It's a for real thing. Move your body every day. I don't mean you have to go in the gym and kill yourself. As you get older, time under tension, a little resistance training, weights, don't fight it. It's very good for you. Do it. And then eat real food. These, we are all drinking these sugary drinks. We don't even realize it. Processed foods, that every day will kick your butt. And people will say, well, I'm too busy in cooking and time. Okay, so what's a priority? And so for me, it isn't about adding more things. It's about taking away. Get rid of the things that don't support your overall well-being, but be clear, to achieve better health in the world that we're in takes effort. You got to have a strategy. So some people cook all their meals for 3 days ahead, or they have everything in the fridge. So I would say that too. If you don't want to eat it, don't bring it home. And then finally, let's talk about breathing. Unless you're sprinting, if you're sitting at your desk all day and you're on your computer, you should be nose breathing. And if you can get your breathing patterns down to, let's say, 7 to 10 breaths per minute through your nose, so long and slow, in and out through the nose, deep into the diaphragm, a couple things happen. Your CO2 rises in your system because you're breathing through your nose, not scrubbing it through your mouth. With the presence of CO2, your cells and muscle tissue can absorb oxygen. If you're scrubbing, mouth breathing, you're actually not absorbing the oxygen in your bloodstream. Okay. So this alone will make you calmer, down-regulate you, because your breath is slow. If you're breathing through your mouth, it's in your chest, and you're doing this, you're stressed out. So breathing, and if you're sleeping at night, if you can, sleep with your mouth closed. Your jaw development, your teeth oxidizing. If you have children, make sure they're sleeping with their mouth closed. Listen, it's free, and you can do it anywhere. So the breath is very, very important. If people want to learn more about it, Jill Miller, Patrick McCune, James Nestor. Those are just 3 very good people who have good scientific books about what I'm talking about. But that's number 1.
Got it. No, those are great. So maybe I want to be respectful of your time, and, I think maybe 2 final questions. One would be, looking back, is there any advice you would have given your younger self? And then 2, what's next for you? What sort of, looking forward, what are the challenges that you've laid out for yourself, or the objectives you've laid out for yourself that you're looking forward to achieving? What sort of the next few decades look like for Gabby Reece?
So for my younger self, and this is very typical, the notion of not taking anything personal is very important. However, I've learned so much more, which is, when somebody says something to you that really bothers you, it's generally because some issue you have with it. And so, like, if somebody was like, "Oh, you're so lazy," and this and that, I think that would roll off my back. If someone said to me, "Well, maybe you try to control things, or you live a little in your head," like with my kids, let's say, and I got my feathers all ruffled, it's probably because there's something true about that. And I know. So all I'm saying is, rather than reacting, when you feel that moment, when you feel that little hot thing that rises up inside of you when people say things to you, take a look at it. Don't get defensive. It's okay. Just take a look at it. Finally, the last thing I would have said to my younger self is, don't limit yourself, because there is something about striving and trying to reach your own personal goals that also can make the people around you uncomfortable. And sometimes we will quiet ourselves down to make everybody else feel better. And I would say, don't do that, because if you've been handed a gift, a baton, great timing, your job is not to feel guilty or shame for that. Your job is to take care of that and see how far you can take it, because then you'll hand it off to someone else and you'll occupy another space. And so don't squander those gifts or that moment because someone else is uncomfortable. And as far as I'm concerned, going forward, now that my kids are a little older, I'm really wanting to put more energy and attention into my own work. And so I think it's sort of like this next chapter of getting busier and wanting to do more, because sometimes in parenting, it's sort of a more quiet time. It just is, right? Because you're making yourself more available for these humans in your life that this is the timing. But I think we think, oh, I'm going to slow down as I get older. And for me, I'm actually more interested in getting busier. So whether it's continuing to support Laird Superfood or XBT, or in fact, kind of creating another window about what is it that I can contribute from this point of view in my life.
Okay, great. And I know I said that was the last question, but it made me think about, another area that I wanted to ask you quickly about. Can you talk a little bit about, community service? I know that that's an important part of you and your family's life. What are some of the areas that you've been involved in, and, how has that been an important part of your life?
My husband calls it the selfish act of giving. I think that we've made it such a church and state thing. Like, I work and I do community service. I think when we can blend it to the best of our ability as just also a part of our life, it not only feeds us back in return on such an exponential, but it's also the real opportunity to learn, to continue to be connected, because we all get caught in our own bubbles and we get disconnected. And this is a way that I think not only then can support our fellow man and humans, but also keep us learning, keep us seeing about the world that we live in, but not making it so separate, just being like, hey, I can help here, or it just becomes a part of your life. I did it in a structured way because that helped me. I used to, for example, like teach a class for $1 for 3 days a week. So for me, it was like laid out in a structured way, because otherwise I wasn't going to find the time. And it doesn't have to be big. That's the other thing. I think people they don't start because they think, well, maybe that's not really going to do anything. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't have to be on some weird big scale, little bit, your neighbor, whatever. It all moves in the right direction. And I think that is really important. I also want to say something, which is, sometimes I hear these interviews or I see them and I think, oh, it all seems so like, I work hard and I'm disciplined and all this stuff. I want to confess that at the base of everything I'm doing is because I really want to kick butt and be successful. I really do. Like, this isn't some like, oh, that feels good. I really feel determined. However, every person I've ever met that really for me was a true like warrior, for example, they were in and of love. And
Okay.
so I want to remind people that they can live side by side. You can kick butt and take, names and numbers and be coming from a place of your own authenticity or genuine self, whatever that is, and crush it. So I want to make sure I'm not misrepresenting myself, that I'm like, oh, this is all about, being nice and good. It's not. It's about really wanting to crush it, but in the long run, and as a member of the world that I live in. And what does that look like for each of us? So I feel like that feels important. And to remind people, not everyone's going to love what you do. You cannot make everyone happy. And we live in a very loud world. Everybody can chime in. Don't worry about that. If you're honoring yourself and you can look at yourself in the mirror each day, I think that's sufficient.
Yeah, that's great advice. And, I think if you could think about what are the ways that you hope to keep improving over the next few years or decades, where is it that you feel like you've got the most room for personal growth? What is it that you're working on the most? I mean, to your point, I think from the audience perspective, you have a lot of great answers and have clearly had, a really honest perspective and approach to all of your career. So what is it that you're still looking to work on, and where is the growth for Gabby Reese?
So superficially, I have been working on my physical flexibility practice, because there is only so much time in the day and I'd rather grind it out and lift weights than like stretch. And so from a completely superficial point of view, I will be working on that. And I've been thinking a lot about this. So as we sort of reach certain levels of either biological age and time you've been on the planet to levels of success, all of a sudden we start to think we know something. And this is a very dangerous place to live. And I am a know-it-all inside myself for sure. Like, I definitely think I know best, right? So what I'm trying to do in a real way is, how do I practice the things I know to be true and simultaneously be completely open to everything new. And it's very hard to do because it's like, how are you in your legs and in your feet standing, but then simultaneously taking each day like you don't know anything. And so if you ask me what I'm trying to do, because I don't want to set up like concrete, that's the thing. I don't want my brain to be like, I know. And it's very easy to do. Especially if you've had any inkling of, success, whatever they call success. So going forward, there's a woman named Byron Katie, and I talk to Katie a lot, and I say, sometimes you hear these scenarios and it looks like you're hearing it for the first time. And she's like, oh, I am. So listening, even though we know the story, like you've heard it for the first time. So that's what I'm doing, because I trust that approach will help me navigate all the things I really want, which will be, well, what am I doing next? And how will I stay open and younger as I get older? Like that's another thing that's important. Take care of the root that will take care of all the things that you want versus trying to figure out, well, how do I do all those things? No, well, what at the root practice will help you to just take care of that.
Wow. Thank you, Gabby. It was really interesting to hear your perspective and insights into your career and your approach to life. And I know our audience appreciated it.
Well, thank you for your time. And I just want to encourage everyone to really ask themselves how they want to do it and follow that thing from your heart, because then I genuinely believe that that's connected to real success. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Gabby. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. We hope you found Gabby Reese as interesting and delightful as we did. Thank you.